dropping the ball, but because so much is going on, that the U.S. has strangled oil shipments to Cuba, which means that Cuba is experiencing a real collapse of their electric grid, which means that there are long periods of time when there is no electricity in Cuba right now. And what that means is that people who are in the hospitals on machines that are dependent on power are dying. Your ventilator goes because there's no electricity, you're going to die. And there are so many ways in which the maneuvers of the Trump administration, from slashing aid to to the strikes we've made on so many different countries, to the strikes on small boats, just sort of suggests that human beings don't matter at all. That unless you are a certain group of people that I would call the predator. Are so many ways in which the maneuvers of the Trump administration, from slashing aid to to the strikes we've made on so many different countries, to the strikes on small boats, just sort of suggests that human beings don't matter at all. That unless you are a certain group of people that I would call the predator class, the rest of us don't matter. And what I wanted to call out about that in this minute is when we talk about the strikes that are happening in Iran and the war that's going on with Iran, with no buy-in, of course, from Congress, we're not really talking about the people who are actually fighting that war, who are in danger and who are a long way from their families. So I know I've got military people who listen to me, and I know I have military families who listen to me. And I just sort of want you to know that even though the newspapers are sort of acting as if somehow your people are just numbers on a column, they're not to us. They're not to the people who live in the United States. You're not non-player characters to us. And some of my all-time favorite and best students are in the military, and I think about them. I'm not even going to say every day, because it's more like constantly. So just start with a shout out there to the military people who are bearing the brunt of the current president. All right, so I wanted to make sure that people remembered that, first of all. Now, second of all, let's talk a little bit about where the administration is right now and where the president is right now. So a number of you asked about what it was that Trump meant when he said that Iran gave him a huge present today. The answer to that is, who knows? Like, why are we even trying to make any sense out of the way this man thinks any longer? Because his thinking was not clear before he appeared to slip as badly as he has during this administration. And we now know increasingly that he is presenting as reality things that are not real. So yesterday, for example, I think I've lost track of the days. Yesterday, he announced that the U.S. and Iran was in talks and that he was going to hold off on the strikes that he had threatened on Saturday against Iran's power generating plants, which is a war crime, to go after civilian infrastructure. And he announced yesterday morning, just before the stock market opened, that in fact that the U.S. and Iran was in discussions. And then he followed that up with conversations with reporters at the Palm Beach International Airport, in which he was pretty detailed about what the Iranians had agreed to and how the talks were going to go and so on. Although he did say things like, if this doesn't work out, we're going to continue to bomb our little hearts out, quotation there. But at the end of the day, of course, what we found out is that those negotiations aren't happening. That the U.S. has, through intermediaries, Pakistan, Turkey, Greece, reached out to one of the allies of the new supreme leader in Iran, but that supreme leader has rebuffed those invitations. So he sort of has this fantasy of what's happening, and we just don't know, because again, normally any kind of negotiations would be undertaken by the State Department, but Trump is instead using his special envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, and his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who are both real estate people who have big interests in the Middle East. So when you think about what he means when he says Iran gave us a big gift, who knows? He has said it's related to oil and gas, but maybe there's nothing, maybe there's something, maybe there's something big, who knows? But one of the points that I want to make today is that we in the United States of America are absolutely going to have to grapple with what Trump is doing and has done and will do. But letting him determine the conversation going forward is a huge mistake, because the man is a loose cannon, and we just don't know what's real and what's not. He doesn't know what's real and what's not. And so if we're going to keep this country on any kind of an even keel, we have to recognize that we cannot take our marching orders from the president, which is not that we ever took marching orders from a president before, but in the past, if, President Barack Obama said he was going to be talking about affordable health care, for example, you knew who the players were and you knew what the conversation was, and you might like it or you might not like it. But you didn't have to feel like, in fact, maybe what he was really doing was trying to buy Greenland, So we have to recognize that we are not in normal times with this particular president. All right, so let me back off a little bit about where Trump is, and talk about Iran and what's happening in Iran. So as you all know by now, Trump bombed Iran with the idea that he would go in and get out the way he did in Venezuela, take out the Ayatollah, the supreme leader, and replace him with some more moderate people in Iran. Because if you remember, Iran's actually been under real pressure. Their leadership has been under real pressure from protests in the streets. Remember that a few months ago? And the hope was the leaders of those more moderate groups could step in and take over, and the U.S. would be able to work more closely with those people. But in fact, what happened was that the Israelis with whom the U.S. made these strikes took out not only the Ayatollah, but also a number of people around him, and also sort of expected that there would be a popular uprising, and there wasn't. So what's happened is that, at least to all appearances, the supreme leader has been replaced by his son, who is much more of a hardliner, much younger and much more of a hardliner than his father was. But when I say to all appearances, Trump keeps making the point, and it's a legitimate one, that nobody has seen this man since the strikes. So where he is and what his condition of health is remains unclear in this moment. So they expected this was going to be very quick. That's not what happened. And instead, we've gotten ourselves caught in a war over there over the issue. And you can see this real divorce in language from Trump, who keeps saying, we won, we won, we won. What he means is that the U.S.'s extraordinary military might has, in fact, badly, badly hurt Iran's military capacity. But as everybody always knew, Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz. And the Strait of Hormuz, you've heard about this a million times now, right? It's the outlet from the Persian Gulf. About 20% of of the world's oil and natural gas goes through the strait, but so does about 20 to 25% of the world's fertilizer, the ingredients for fertilizer, plus a number of other pieces of consumer goods as well, including, by the way, helium. And helium, I'm going to mention this now and not I mention it again. Helium is the element that cools MRI machines. So you can't use MRIs without helium. And what's happened is that Iran has bottled up in the Persian Gulf ships that normally would go out the Strait of Hormuz, but they're now bottled up there because Iran's not letting them through, or at least is threatening the ones that want to go through. There's a distinction there because the way it's actually happening is they have simply said they're going to strike ships. It appears they have not, I'm not on a ship there. It appears they have not mined the strait, but of course they can hit boats on the strait, ships on the strait with drones, for example. And what they've done is they have permitted the ships of certain countries to pass through, paying a fee. I think the fee is $2 million. And what that's done, of course, is it has strangled the oil coming out of the Persian Gulf, and it's driven the cost of Brent crude oil very, very high. And one of the things that the administration keeps saying is, well, we don't need that oil because we produce more oil than that in the United States. And that is true, except the U.S. produces more oil than it consumes, but the oil that we produce is a different grade than we consume. And so we are tied to the international oil markets because our refineries were actually developed before we got the light sweet crude that we produce now. So our refineries are all designed to refine the heavy sour crude that comes in from other countries. So don't believe that thing about how we don't need oil from any place else. What we need is either refineries that can handle the oil we produce, or we need oil from somewhere else. But until now, the stuff we produce is more valuable than the stuff we import. And so it made economic sense to export the sweet light and pay for the sour crude as it came in, and then refine it and sell it here. So the administration is in a really hard place because Trump went into this war without a plan for what to do if it didn't go according to plan. There was no plan B. And the options are not good because do we try and take that strait militarily? That's people. That's our people. And this war is unpopular already before you start pouring more people in, although the administration is moving more and more people to the Persian Gulf. And at least historically in this one term, Trump has used the troops every time he has put them forward. Doesn't mean he's going to now, but it means that his history has been, hey, the people are there, let's put them in. So we don't know what that's going to do. But at the same time, what the administration really needs and what we all really need is for that oil to come back out of the Persian Gulf. And it's not at all clear that continuing to fight is going to make that happen. Now, just a word here. There is a story here that I don't fully understand yet at all, but it is worth paying attention to the fact that Trump certainly appears to be trying to become sort of a petro-oligarch himself. That is, the countries that he is trying to absorb are ones that have a lot of oil, including Venezuela. Although Venezuela's oil is almost like tar. It's a different grade even than the two that I talked about. But now Iran, he keeps saying that he's going to have control over Iran's oil. And he is, of course, trying desperately to get rid of renewable energy in the United States of America, which just kills me, I have to say. Just recently, he has paid another country's companies $1 billion of our taxpayer money to give up the permits that they bought to produce wind farms off the east coast of the United States. And this idea that we are somehow tying ourselves to fossil fuels in a moment when the whole world knows that renewables are going to be the answer is clearly, to me, an attempt to enrich his people, him and his people. And people say, well, we should return to renewables. One of the things that's really interesting in this period is that about 2/3 of the fossil fuels that the United States uses, and we use this at a higher rate than other countries, is in transportation. So we actually could fix this, but the problem is we can't fix it tomorrow. Those of us who care a lot about the environment think maybe this will be the kick that will force us really to deal with our fossil fuel addiction, but we can't fix that tomorrow. The turnover is going to be at least 10 years. So the administration's in this real fix. Like what do they do except try to change the subject, really? Now, a couple of things about that. We do know that when Trump came out with this suggestion that he was, or statement that his people were negotiating with Iran yesterday morning, he did it before the stock market opened, and you can always see that he is trying to keep the stock market calm and trying to keep the stock market happy. And one of the things that happened 15 minutes before he made that announcement was that somebody shorted a whole lot of oil and S&P 500 futures and made a killing when Trump said that, in fact, they were negotiating, because the price of oil dropped dramatically and the S&P 500 futures jumped up. So somebody did incredibly well. The oil futures alone were worth about $580 million. So there is also this angle of the corruption that is going on in the White House and in people associated with the White House in this moment. So you got Trump there, who finally has bitten off way more than he can chew. I've made the point before that in his life, he's always had someone to fix his mistakes. And in this case, there's nobody around him to fix this mistake. He did this. He got rid of all the advisors who would have told him no and did tell him no in his first term. And as soon as he realized he'd kicked a hornet's nest, he tried to bully our allies and partners into come helping him out. And they were like, thank you very much, but we're rearranging our sock drawer today. And now he is somehow supposed to fix it on his own. And what he may well do is simply declare that there has been, we've come to an agreement on principle with Iran, and then leave all the details for later, and then simply walk away and never deal with those details, which is pretty much what happened. Gaza. Remember, there was an announcement that everybody had agreed in principle and they would work out the details later. And then he simply walked away, and Gaza is just a disaster, right? So it's entirely possible he could do that. It may make sense for the Iranians as well, because they'll stop the bombs from dropping at the same time that it will give them time to string out the process of reintegrating into either the Gulf or into the world, or to produce a nuclear weapon. It may be that we do have Trump basically saying, okay, we're done, and trying to walk home. It may not be as well. We don't know how that's going to play out. But what we do know is Trump is really erratic and is recognizing he's got himself a real problem on his hands with the rising cost of oil, the dropping stock market, and that people don't want to be in this war. Okay, so if that's the case, what else is going on? If Trump is weakened on that front, he's also weakening in other places as well. So I said to you before that losing one of the people around him would weaken him, as it did with the loss of Kristi Noem as Homeland Security Secretary. When she went down, she has opened up the way for people to start talking about what the Department of Homeland Security looked like internally. And what they're doing is they're spilling the tea on Kristi Noem and Corey Lewandowski. Corey Lewandowski was a temporary employee of the administration, of the government, and the stories that have come out about him suggest that he had way more power than he should have. He was in control of contracts. There are allegations that he was demanding bribes to steer contracts to private prison companies, for example, that he, what was some of the other ones, the bribes, the contracts, that he was, and that he was steering other contracts as well to his own people, to people that he was close to. And there's also all kinds of stories coming about out just recently in the New York Times, for example, about how much control he had there. That weakens the administration because this issue of corruption is an important one, and it's one that Americans actually care about. And it's one that they care about, especially now when we're spending $1 billion, this is killing me, $1 billion a day in Iran. And, you see these things for the $220 million that Kristi Noem spent on an ad campaign. That's the one with her on the horses. And you're starting to see more stories about the corruption in this government. And in addition to the floodgates sort of being opened on Noem and Lewandowski, you can see now there's pressure on Kash Patel, the head of the FBI. You asked about that today, too. By the way, it's always kind of a game for me to see if I can tie your questions into a story. Sometimes I make it all, sometimes I don't. But you did ask about Kash Patel, whom Rhode Island's Senator Sheldon Whitehouse went after today for the corruption of the FBI, talking about how Patel has turned the FBI into a place to enable Trump to get revenge on people he considers his enemies, and that it's wasted a ton of money, and that it's actually left us significantly less safe than we were before he got in charge there. And I think you're going to see more and more people sort of picking away at the people around Trump. Now, another one that is jumping out there is Pam Bondi, Attorney General Pam Bondi, who is really in the hot seat over the Epstein files. And there's been more news coming out about the Epstein files. It is available. Every once in a while, you should just Google Epstein files because new stuff is coming out. There are a number of very good reporters on it, especially Julie Brown from the Miami Herald. Miami Herald, I think. Sorry, top of my head, I'm not sure. I think it's the Herald. Anyway, she's the one who's been all over this story and really kept it alive when most people were willing to walk away. And one of the things that we've learned in the last week is that there were 2 calls to the FBI after Epstein was found dead in his prison cell to the FBI of people saying, hey, there are agents here that are shredding bags full of evidence, and we don't think this is a good idea. You ought to come check it out. And now it appears, this is a pretty big story now, it appears that the story of Epstein's death in his cell is at least being challenged. Bondi, of course, under the Epstein Files Transparency Act that was passed on November 19th, 2025, by law, had to turn over all of that information to the American public by December 19th. And to date now, the Department of Justice has only published about half that material. And they're saying that the rest of it is duplicates. Well, the answer to that is then publish it anyway, right? We can sort through duplicates. But in fact, the material that has already come out is damning. It shows that Donald Trump's name is in those files. A lot of times it also showed that Epstein was being investigated from 2010 to at least 2015 for money laundering, prostitution, and drug trafficking. And there's real question about what happened to that particular investigation. We don't know how it was closed, if it was closed, or when it was closed, all of which would tell us a lot. But Pam Bondi now has been subpoenaed by the House Oversight and Reform Committee. That's the one that James Comer, the Republican of Kentucky, is in charge of. And the 5 Republicans on the committee said, we're done with this too. She needs to come in and she needs to testify. And here's the kicker, under oath. So there's been a real difference lately, you can see, between members of the administration who are testifying under oath and those who are not. The ones who are testifying under oath are squirming because the senators, for example, who talked to the director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, the head of the CIA, John Ratcliffe, and the head of the FBI, Kash Patel, the other day, those three were all under oath. And they admitted to things like Kash Patel admitted that the government is buying our location information from private companies. Now, if they wanted to get it through judges, they would have to actually get a judge to sign off on them getting that information. But they're getting around the Fourth Amendment, which prohibits the government from engaging in unreasonable searches and seizures by buying it from private companies. Well, he said that under oath. Now, Pam Bondi, who has not been under oath in any of the really aggressive, embarrassing performances she has made in this administration, has been subpoenaed by the House Oversight Committee to appear on April 14th under oath. Now, as soon as Comer gave her that subpoena, which happened, I think, on March 18th, it was March 17th, because on March 18th, she held a hearing in front of that committee in which she was not under oath, and she was trying to say, now you don't have to subpoena me, now you don't have to make me appear under oath. But the Democrats walked out and said, we're going to hold you to the subpoena. My guess is she's going to find any way in the world not to do it. But the point here is that the pressure on the Epstein files continues and should continue. But where does that get us? So a couple of questions you asked about. It gets us, first of all, to the question of, I'm actually going to go back really to the cost of the war in Iran. A lot of you asked about the fact that there's a report from Fortune right now saying that the U.S. is insolvent, and everybody in the news missed that. Really misleading. That is, the U.S. under Donald Trump is spending money like water in the ocean. I mean, the idea that somehow he was going to get the national debt and the deficit under control. Remember, the debt is the giant pot. The deficit is the yearly difference between what comes in and what goes out. It's just crazy because he's just spending money. And, his money he just spent $1 billion to buy back the licenses to wind farms. I mean, who does that, right? And can you imagine if Joe Biden had done something like that? The Republicans would have had his head. I don't know how many times at this point he would have been out of there. But the thing to remember about the United States is that we are a fabulously wealthy country. Now, that doesn't mean as individuals. We have a very deep problem of inequality in this country. Since 1975, actually, more than $50 trillion has come out of the bottom 90% and gone to the top 1%. We've got a real inequality problem here. But we don't really have a wealth problem. So where am I going with that? One of the things that we have simply got to do is create a fairer tax structure, because the reason that we are operating with a deficit, and please, if you don't listen to anything else that I do or take to heart anything else that I do, listen to this, because taxes are my thing. Like I love the study of taxes, which sounds bonkers, I know, but I love the study of taxes because it says what a society values. And mind you, as you know, I'm virtually enumerate. The numbers themselves, I don't know the difference between a 6 and a 9, unless I count it out on my fingers. The concepts are so important. And the reason when they him in the side that morning. Oh, Lord. Said if you were there, I wonder did they pierce the Savior in the side? You stop them and you. Reason that we
get up, stand up. to fight.
Oh, preacher man, don't tell me heaven is under the earth. I know you don't know what life is really worth. It's not all that glitter is gold, and half the story had never been told.
Have a deficit.
Tell it to. Tell it to, girl, man. You know you got me doing everything crazy that you want me to do. Yes, you have, girl. Don't you know you got to tell the truth, yeah? Baby, why don't you tell me the truth now? You know you got me doing everything crazy that you want me to do. Yes, you have. Yeah, watch it. Loving you is just a little bit easy. Started so hard to stop. Yeah, I could. Baby, they know I would. I feel a stone all around if I thought that it would do any good.
Day.
For homicide detectives, their chance of
We don't take it as much as goes out is because of the or not even the Reagan tax cuts, but the George W.
Attention please. Attention please. Attention please. Attention please.
Bush tax cuts
Please. Attention please.
and the Donald J. Trump tax cuts. Think about it.
Attention please.
Under Bill Clinton, who was president in the 1990s, the United States of America did not operate on a deficit. We were operating in the black. And that was partly some of the stuff that Clinton did, but he raised some of the taxes, especially on high earners, but also because of some of the stuff that George H.W. Bush did. Remember the thing that, read my lips, no new taxes, and then he had to go back on that, and that's why the Republicans turned against him. What did us in was the George W. Bush tax cuts, and then the unfunded wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. And then Trump cut taxes again. If we are concerned about the solvency of the United States, and believe you me, I am, because I'm looking at the fact that under the Trump administration, they have cut years off the solvency of Social Security and Medicare, not Medicaid, Medicare. there's a very easy solution, and that's get rid of those tax cuts. I mean, honest to God, and when people complain about taxes, somehow they make it sound like the government's going to walk away with everything they ever owned. Literally, this means walking back to where we were, even before Trump would be a start, but before George W. Bush. So this idea that somehow the United States is in a uniquely bad place right now, yeah, we owe a ton of money and the deficit is huge. And as a result, the amount of money we pay to service that debt, to pay the interest on it, is crazy. Like most of our money, not most, I should say, lots of our money goes simply to paying the interest on that debt. And I'm not going to go into the whole finances of it, but that's really, really, really solvable if we have the will to solve it. It's not a mystery. I promise you, it's not a mystery. And until these very recent years, until, even past Reagan, until George W. Bush, actually, the impulse of people in Congress, when we were spending more money than we were taking in, was to raise taxes. That's just the way it was done. I mean, everybody since the start, since the American Revolution, but certainly since the Civil War, when the Republicans invented income taxes, and it was a progressive income tax, that's been the way we address these things. So this idea that somehow American insolvency is, this is it, we're at the end of the cliff, things are terrible. No, it's an incredibly wealthy country. We just got to start making people who have a lot of money pay for it, like they always have in the past, until George W. Bush, not H.W., George W. Bush did those big tax cuts. And then, of course, Trump has followed up on that. So that's one place that I wanted to go with this, is this idea of the extraordinary corruption and costs that we are seeing in the administration. There is an answer, at least, to the solvency of the government that you're reading about from that article that was really clickbait. I'm sorry, I read it, and I also read the report that it came out of. There is a solution to this. That's not sort of the end of the road at all. But now another question here is, what does what's happening in the administration mean for the country and mean going forward? So there's a couple of things happening right now. One is that, you've been hearing from me for a very long time that Trump is slipping mentally, that he's a loose cannon, all those things. I am not alone in this observation, I promise you. And the people who are watching him even more closely than I am are the people who want to inherit his political movement. So one of the things that you can see happening right now are people starting to jockey to pick up those MAGA Republicans. Lots of debate about whether or not that's going to be possible. Lots of figures in the mix there. Lots of people trying to hide. I mean, look at J.D. Vance. He does not want to be associated with this Iran war. He doesn't want to not be associated with it either in case it turns out well. But he's not the face of this by any stretch of the imagination. The only person who is clinging to it is Pete Hegseth, who appears to have been very deeply involved in it. And according to something Trump said the other day, he said, Pete, this was your idea. Everybody else is kind of trying to back away because they all know he's gotten himself in over his head, and they don't want to be associated with it when it all goes bad, or if it all goes bad, as these oil prices go up. So you got people jockeying over taking over MAGA, the MAGA Republicans, but you also have people trying to figure out what to do about Trump. They know he's in trouble. They know that the country is in trouble with him there. He does things like go to war without telling anybody, right? So this struggle over Trump and over whether or not to defend him or whether not to defend him or what to do, you can see playing out in somewhat erratic performances by MAGA Republicans who are trying to pick up his people, not offend his people, get some distance from him, not get some distance from him. And, I get stuff frequently from people sending to me statements or interviews that Republicans have done going, what do you make of this? Because somebody who's very MAGA is kind of anti-Trump. So what's going on there is they're trying to figure out how to pick up his voters. But then there is also the very real problem of the fact that Trump and the MAGA Republicans are really unpopular. And so are all of Trump's policies. And you can see that this is the case because they're backing off on them. Before this 2026 election, all of a sudden, the Republicans are not talking about undocumented immigrants. They are trying to back off of the extraordinary violence of the administration under people like Greg Bavina, who's been pushed out of Border Patrol now. They've gotten rid of Corey Lewandowski. They've gotten rid of Kristi Noem. They're trying to look softer and gentler. I would urge you not to buy that for a freaking minute, because Stephen Miller is still in the White House and Russell Vought is still over at the Office of Management and Budget, cutting everything he possibly can. But as they are trying to look more moderate, as they are trying to look more acceptable to to voters in the United States, two things are going on. One, you have the MAGA base, which is I've talked about them recently. They're anti-democratic at this point. They just want power. They're doubling down on the idea of all the stuff that Trump went for. They're complaining that he didn't go far enough. And so they are now, in the same bed as neo-Nazis. They've really gone all white nationalist. Some of the extremists are talking about taking away the right of women to vote and so on. So you got that kernel moving off. But then you also have a lot of Republicans, including those who are not necessarily full-blown MAGA, although at this point you have to call all of them MAGA supporters, deciding that the only possible chance they have of winning the election in 2026 is by suppressing the vote, by making sure Democrats can't vote. And their solution to that right now is the Save America Act. And you've all asked me a great deal about that. Now, let me walk you through a little bit of what's going on with that act, because it is now tangled up, honestly, so much in this administration. Like it's all like a big ball of wire, but it's now tangled up in the Department of Homeland Security funding. So let me explain that pretty quickly. As you know, the Democrats refused to fund the appropriations bill for the Department of Homeland Security for 2026. Like there are 12 appropriations bills. They passed 11, but they said, we're not going to fund the Department of Homeland Security until you clean up ICE and Border Patrol. ICE is the Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Border Patrol is one of the other agencies under the Department of Homeland Security that was responsible for the shooting, for example, of Renee Good and Alex Preddy in Minneapolis. So they said, we're not going to fund that, but we are happy to fund everything else in DHS, and then we can negotiate over what you're going to do to clean up ICE and Border Patrol. And the Republicans, pushed by Trump, said, no, you're going to fund it all just the way we want it. And that's the only way it's going to be. So that's where things have sat now for more than a month. And that's why the Transportation TSA, Transportation Safety Administration, I think it's safety. Sorry, too many acronyms in my head. That's why TSA has not been paid. ICE is getting paid, and ICE is getting paid because what's at stake in the DHS budget is only this year's appropriations for ICE. In fact, in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act of July 2025, the Republicans gave a huge sum of money to ICE. I think it's $85 billion to ICE. So they actually have plenty of money, but they want more money for their operating budget. So the Republicans have said, no, we're not going to fund TSA. We're not going to fund the Coast Guard. We're not going to fund these other aspects of the government under DHS unless you just do what we say. And the Democrats said, not happening. So Sunday night, Trump came out and he said that he would not support any kind of a deal with the Democrats to fund DHS unless it also included the SAVE Act. Act. Okay, so what's happening with that? The issue here is that, and this is complicated, and I'm sorry. I hope I can make it simple enough. The issue is that, as you know, the House has a rule to force people to stop talking. And because of that, you can pass something in the House with a simple majority. The Senate does not have a rule to make people stop talking. So the only way you can force them to stop talking is through a motion called cloture, which you need to have 60 votes to make happen. So if somebody says, I'm not going to stop talking, that's known as a filibuster. So effectively what that means is that in the Senate, if you want to pass a law, you have to get 60 people to vote for it. And it's actually Mitch McConnell, the former Senate Majority Leader, who weaponized this. It was rarely used until he decided to use it to stop the Democrats from accomplishing anything. But in this case, it's working in the Democrats' favor because they're saying, no, we're just not going to do this. We're not going to let you fund the DHS because you need our approval. And we're not going to let you push this SAVE Act through because the SAVE Act calls for requiring people to produce evidence of their citizenship, both to register to vote and to vote. There are two versions of the SAVE Act. One has passed the House. This is the version that is currently before the Senate. Okay, so you're seeing a lot of stuff out there. I'm describing the two of them. And just to be clear, the Republicans are out there. I saw an advertisement from Susan Collins just today, because I'm in Maine, saying Susan Collins believes everybody should have ID to vote. Well, I'm sorry, but in Maine, we would say, I apologize, no shit, Sherlock. You can't register to vote without identification. The question here is, does your identification have to be proof of citizenship? Your driver's license is not proof of citizenship. Your student ID is not proof of citizenship. Your hunter's license is not proof of citizenship. I could go on these lists. The things that prove your citizenship are your birth certificate, which has to have your name on it the way it appears today, and a passport, both of which take a long time to get and are very expensive. So that's what the SAVE Act would do. And it would stop mail-in voting, and except in certain circumstances. And all of a sudden, Trump wants to add to it different attacks on transgender Americans. And by the way, the last statistics I saw said transgender Americans are about 1.6 million transgender Americans in the country. And you can sort of assume that they're probably going to be primarily Democratic voters. So right there, you will just have knocked, more than 1 million voters off the rolls. And the Brennan Center, which follows all this stuff and is crackerjack good, estimates that about 21 million Americans will not be able to prove their citizenships. So you're going to knock them off the rolls. Now, interestingly enough, a lot of Republicans don't want this SAVE Act because there's no guarantee it's not going to knock Republicans off the polls too. That's a different story, which I would love to go into sometime because there's a really interesting backstory to it. But I'm already over time, so I'm not going to give it to you now. All right. So Trump says, I'm not going to sign off on anything. And meanwhile, the TSA lines, of course, are through the hours long in the big city airports. And he's not going to sign anything until he gets that SAVE Act. So what was on the table this afternoon, and I don't know how it's come out because I'm recording while it's being discussed, is the Republicans have apparently agreed to give the Democrats in the Senate everything they asked for. That is, they will fund just the other pieces of DHS, the Coast Guard, the TSA, the other pieces there, not ICE. That'll go back on the table, because what the Senate can do is, and this is where it gets complicated, almost, not everything, but almost everything in the Senate can be filibustered, except judicial appointments. That's a different story. And a very few kinds of revenue measures, financial measures. One of those is called budget reconciliation. And it's under budget reconciliation that the Republicans passed that One Big Beautiful Bill Act, which had everything, including the kitchen sink in it. What they are now saying is they will just simply fund ICE under budget reconciliation, because budget reconciliation cannot be filibustered, and therefore Republicans can pass it with a simple majority, and they've got it. They are also suggesting they will put the SAVE Act in budget reconciliation. Now, by law, you're not supposed to do that. Budget reconciliation measures can only be related to the budget. But that so far has not stopped the Republicans. Certainly, they had a ton of stuff in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act that was not budget related, or at least that affected things differently than the budget. Although I have no doubt that if they try to do that, the lawsuits will be there within minutes of that happening. So what they're trying to do is to kick off the voting rolls those who disagree with the Republican Party. All right, so where does that leave us in this moment? Because I said I was going to leave you with some of the, some things that I hoped would help you wrap up what's happening here and give you some things to do going forward. So first of all, what we have is a profoundly unstable president who has started a war that he can't, has just simply blown up in everybody's faces around the world. And he's got a lot of other problems as well, as those people around him are recognizing that he is increasingly weak and increasingly unstable. And that's going to cause problems for the people around him. And, as more and more scrutiny comes into the administration, that's going to weaken Trump more and more. And yet it's also going to mean that both he and Republicans who recognize how weak they are going to try to pass the SAVE Act and also to convince Americans that the vote is not secure. And you've seen this right now in Georgia, where the FBI and under the director of the National Intelligence, it was weird that she was there, grabbed a whole bunch of ballots from Fulton County. And now we've seen the same thing, the same playbook happening in California, where somebody who is running to become the Republican governor of California, a sheriff now in Riverside County, has grabbed hold of 650,000 ballots, claiming that they were improperly counted, and his people are going to count them, which is, got everybody's hair on fire, because this is basically trying to undermine support for the idea that a Democratic proposition could win. This was votes for Proposition 50, the idea of redistricting California after Texas redistricted. And in fact, that proposition won by a whole lot of votes. And the people who did the counting of the votes say that these accusations are just completely out to lunch. And of course, the people who are saying that are the ones who are qualified to tell us how the system works. So you're seeing this idea of trying to undermine voting. Now, so I told you I would give you things to do, and there are a bunch of them right now. First of all, focus on your states in terms of the people who are in power at the state level, at the state Supreme Court, at the local attorneys general, the state attorneys general, the people who are going to be responsible for voting and counting the votes. Because you don't want those people in control. And those are the places where putting pressure is really going to matter, at the state level for voting. But also, show up for the primaries if they haven't happened in your areas. I got a wonderful letter from someone today who was a first-time primary voter and discovered that the person that they and their spouse backed won by a handful of votes. Every vote matters. That really made my day. Show up for the primaries, and crucially, make your voices heard. Because now is the time. Everything is unsettled. We have a very weak president who is slipping desperately mentally. We've never been in a situation like this in the United States. And what I started out by saying today is that we, those of us who are able really to recognize even where the horizon is and steer the ship, need to be holding those guardrails steady. Not simply saying, oh my God, what's he doing next with ICE? Holding the guardrails steady and saying, we have elections and we have systems for counting those. And we want a government that, takes our $1 billion a day and puts it into healthcare or whatever your particular issue is. I'll work on the tax stuff. Find those issues and put pressure on your elected representatives to do that. And there are many ways to do it. There's the 5 calls. There's a number of campaigns now, including the card campaign, something I back, to make sure people understand what's happening. There's the Visibility Brigade, which is on the overpasses. Make your voices heard, because the people we need to mobilize are the people who are not paying attention, who are just too busy and don't understand that the rising cost of gas and the rising cost of food and all that is because of the people who are currently calling the shots in the United States. There is also here a really wonderful opportunity this weekend to show up to the No Kings rallies. This is going to be a big deal, No Kings, this Saturday. Simply getting out on the streets and letting the administration know, and letting your neighbors know that you're not okay with where we are. And somebody asked me after the last No Kings, that was on a Saturday. The following Monday was when Trump began to knock down the East Wing of the White House. After the Supreme Court found Trump's tariffs unconstitutional, about a week later is when he dropped bombs on Iran. I think, yes, we have to expect that he will lash out after this No Kings rally. But the minute we start censoring our behavior or our language because of things we're afraid might happen, that's the minute we've lost our democracy. So I urge people, if you feel safe and, get your friends together, show up at a No Kings rally, do it safely. But I told you this spring was going to be rough, and we are not at the bottom yet. We're absolutely not at the bottom of it. But I hope that people find some comfort in the fact that the administration is increasingly brittle, and that our community of people who care about democracy, and that is not a partisan position, is getting stronger by the day. So lots going on, really confusing stuff going on. Again, I think if you take one message away from me, aside from the taxes today, it's that you don't have to get completely tangled up in everything happening minute to minute in the TSA negotiations, for example. There's too much going on. It's too confusing. It doesn't really follow the way that normal legislation is supposed to happen. Find your lane, and if you got to let some stuff flow off without you watching it for a while, that's okay. But keep in mind what it is that you care about, what matters to you, and what you can do to make the world a better place. Because boy, that stuff comes back in really, really, really surprising ways way into the future. And that's the kind of world that we got to build right now. All right, I'm done. I will, if anybody's interested, today is Tuesday, tomorrow's Wednesday. I believe at 1:00 tomorrow, I'm having a conversation with Tim Snyder, the professor who studies authoritarianism, although I'm really trying to push him kind of away from authoritarianism in this particular conversation. He wrote a recent book that I thought was very interesting that I want to talk to him about. Thursday, I'll be back doing Politics Chat, and I forget what else I'm doing for the rest of the week. Lots of interviews with people coming up, and just lots going on. But I'm trying to be here and keep a steady hand on the wheel. So please join me when you're able to. And remember, it is spring. Get out there, get exercise, see your friends, grow some flowers. We got to grab life as well as all the craziness going on around us. Thank you for being here, and I will see you again soon. Trump is mentally falling apart. You can see it. You can see the vagueness. You can see the fact he called Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, the president of the United States the other day. You can see it in these rants that you're seeing on social media. You can see it in sort of his really inappropriate behavior. You can see that he's not all there. So when this guy spoke up to him and sort of pushed back, he didn't argue. He just kind of sat back like, oh, this is new. So you're starting to see people push back, but not just this gentleman who was in the Oval Office.